species in the galaxy, known more for their arguments, frozen desserts, and chaotic nature, suddenly turned the tide of a galactic war. What if those same fragile creatures, with outdated ships and no psychic powers, made the most feared empire retreat? Not with superior weapons, but with fearless minds. This isn't just a story about war. It's the moment the galaxy realized humanity doesn't follow the rules. They rewrite them. Stay tuned, because once you hear what happened, you'll never look at Earth the same way again. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Let's move toward wonderful story. In the heart of the Andari Nebula, inside the colossal dome of the Interstellar Union's Grand Assembly Hall, a strange silence hung heavy in the air. Normally, this chamber echoed with music, formal greetings, and endless ceremony. But not today. Representatives from over 300 alien civilizations took their seats without a single word of fanfare. No ritual dances, no diplomatic chants, not even the usual exchange of light pulses or scent-based greetings. It was as if the galaxy itself had forgotten how to breathe. Chancellor Drea, the head of the Union Council, stood at the center of the chamber. Her translucent skin shimmered with a dull orange light, a shade that meant worry, even fear, among her people. For a race that photosynthesized emotions, this was like shouting an alarm. Everyone could see it. Everyone could feel it. Something had gone terribly wrong. From the far side of the chamber, Ambassador Nalix of the Vetchery Confederation moved slowly toward the central speaking platform. Unlike most of the other delegates, Nalix had no legs. He slid across the smooth floor on a cushion of air, his sleek, moss-colored body almost floating. Vetchery were known for their calm minds and peaceful approach to conflict, but today Nalix's skin flickered between uneasy shades of dark green and gray. His sensory whiskers twitched in the cold air, picking up on the panic rippling through the room. Even species without noses could sense the anxiety building. As he reached the center, the lights dimmed. A soft pulse of light moved across the walls, signaling attention. Nalix didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked around the room, scanning the many faces, some with eyes, some with antennae, some with more limbs than most species had names for. All of them were focused on him. "I wish I were here to bring good news," Nalix began, his voice calm but serious. "I wish I were reporting on a successful peace treaty or an advancement in interspecies medicine, but I am not." The room remained still. Even the fidgeting of nervous appendages stopped. The silence was thick, charged with fear and anticipation. "We made a mistake," he said clearly. A mistake that, if left unspoken, could become the most dangerous error in recorded galactic history. A flicker of disbelief passed through the chamber. Mistakes happened, yes, but galactic history spanned tens of thousands of cycles. What could be worse than the asteroid war or the rebellion of the hive minds? Nalix gestured with a long, ribbon-like tendril, and a holographic image floated into the air above him. It showed a star system, blue-white sun, swirling gas giants, and a small third planet, green and blue. "Humans," Nalix said simply. "Species 562A. Classification: self-developing, organic, bipedal, carbon-based, unpredictable, until recently believed to be low risk. Curious, somewhat primitive, emotionally chaotic but lacking in large-scale influence." Some of the delegates chuckled. Others exchanged amused glances. Everyone knew of humans. They were strange, loud, always arguing, always building things and then breaking them. Most species found them entertaining, if a little messy. Nalix didn't smile. His tone turned sharper. "We thought they were harmless. We laughed at their endless debates. We rolled our eyes at their obsession with flavored frozen liquids. We dismissed them because they lacked psychic communication, lacked planetary scale. Shields lacked everything we thought necessary to be dangerous." The hologram shifted. Now it showed a small fleet of ships, bulky, asymmetrical, human in design. Behind them, 3 planets glowed in soft light. Nalix tapped the air, and the image zoomed in. A test. That's what it was called. A test by the Torzan Dominion, a strategic probe of human colony defenses. 3 outer colonies were targeted: Eden Cove, Novara Station, Delta Verge. No declaration of war, no warning. Just ships arriving, ready to take what wasn't theirs. Gasps rippled through the room. The Torzan were aggressive, yes, but this was bold even for them. The Torzan thought it would be simple, Nalek said. They brought dreadnoughts, cruisers, and full invasion squads. They believed they would win before humans even realized what was happening. Nalek paused and looked around the chamber again. But humans, he said slowly, were not surprised. The tension in the room thickened. Not surprised? They were waiting, Nalek said. Not just ready, but eager. They didn't run, they didn't hide, they didn't even send surrender messages. What they sent was strange. A new image appeared in the hologram, text from a human transmission. Finally, a challenge. The room fell completely silent. That was all they said. Nalek continued. 3 words, and then chaos. Beautiful, terrifying chaos. Took a deep breath, or the Vetchery version of one. I am here not just to tell you what happened, but to warn you. We cannot view Earth the way we once did. We must never again call humans harmless. What the Torzan started was not a battle. It was an awakening. And it's time the galaxy woke up too. Nalex's tendrils coiled tightly. The lights above shifted to a deep violet, signaling emotional alert. Delegates whispered, glanced nervously at one another, trying to process what they had just heard. More will be explained, Nalek said, his voice now a low whisper. But know this, the storm has already begun, and humanity is not what we thought they were. The silence that followed was heavier than before. It wasn't just fear now. It was realization. Something powerful had been sleeping at the edge of the galaxy, and someone had poked it awake. The Torzan Dominion had always been proud of their military strength. For hundreds of cycles, they had ruled the outer sectors of the galaxy with iron, discipline, and calculated aggression. Their fleets were unmatched in size, precision, and cold efficiency. Strategist Rithan, one of their most trusted military minds, sat in the command chamber aboard the Dominion flagship, the Obsidian Crest, reviewing the latest reports with calm confidence. To him, this was just another mission, a small one, a routine test. The target? 3 human colonies located in a distant stretch of the Orion Spur, Eden Cove, Novara Station, and Delta Verge. The humans were considered a minor species, barely past their planetary squabbles. They had no psychic networks, no planetary shields, and no record of participation in galactic affairs. To the Torzan, this operation wasn't even classified as a true invasion. It was called a controlled acquisition. Strategist Rithan's plan was simple: a surprise arrival, rapid landfall, minimal resistance, and a quick takeover. The colonies would be perfect outposts for future expansion. Commander Vayek, leading the operation, was told to expect light opposition and no need for reinforcements. The reports from their intelligence team showed minimal armament and outdated propulsion systems. Humans had built their ships using combustion-based engineering just a few generations ago. By Torzan standards, they were laughably outdated. Vayek had even joked during the pre-mission briefing, "We'll be home before the second sun sets on Torza Prime." The crew laughed. The mission was treated like a training exercise for new officers. After all, what threat could a group of resource-hungry bipeds pose to the might of the Dominion? As the fleet approached the first target, Eden Cove, the mood aboard the Obsidian Crest was relaxed. Torzan soldiers polished their weapons, ran drills, and passed the time watching simulations of past victories. But then, something odd happened. Just as the first wave of scout ships entered the human colony's outer perimeter, their signals were jammed. Not with advanced encryption or military firewalls. No, the human system broadcasted something stranger. Music. A haunting melody, followed by a human voice that said, "We see you." Commander Vayek raised an eyebrow. "Are they mocking us?" Strategist Rithen frowned. No, they're sending a message. Before more could be said, the human defense fleet appeared, not slowly, not in disorder, but in swift, chaotic motion. Their ships, though smaller and less armored, moved like nothing the Torsen had seen before. They darted between asteroids, used the gravitational pull of moons for slingshot maneuvers, and formed no traditional battle line. There was no symmetry, no pattern, only motion, unpredictable and wild. Back at the Interstellar Union Council, Ambassador Nalix watched the gathered delegates lean forward as he told the story. His voice lowered slightly. The Torsen were confused. They thought their systems were malfunctioning. They believed their sensors were damaged because the human formations made no logical sense. Nalix let the silence hang for a moment. But their systems weren't broken. What they saw was human strategy. At Novara Station, the second colony under attack, a similar scene played out. The Torsen dreadnought Silent Hammer deployed its assault craft expecting little resistance. Instead, the humans jammed their systems with what they called white noise, an old Earth technique. Torsen targeting systems failed, communications scrambled. The first torpedoes launched by the humans struck clean through the hull of a cruiser before anyone could react. As the battle unfolded, a human vessel damaged beyond repair did something unthinkable. It accelerated directly into the flank of a Torsen warship and detonated its reactor. The explosion tore through both ships and took down a third. At Delta Verge, pilot Renzo Thorne led a squadron of improvised fighter crafts through the wreckage of old satellites. He used the debris as cover, emerging only long enough to fire high-intensity projectiles before vanishing again. One of the Torsen commanders described it later as trying to catch a shadow with your bare claws. The humans weren't just resisting, they were adapting, outmaneuvering and outthinking. Lena Voss, a colony engineer, rerouted power from abandoned mining rigs to create a makeshift gravity trap. When a Torsen cruiser passed through the area, it was pulled violently off course and crashed into one of its own support frigates. Back aboard the Obsidian Crest, Commander Vayek realized too late that the test had turned into a war, and they were losing. Strategist Rithen, no longer calm, issued a recall order, but the damage was done. 3 colonies had held their ground against the full strength of a Dominion task force, not because they had better weapons, not because they had better numbers, but because they refused to surrender, because they fought with something the Torsen didn't understand: imagination. At the council, Nalix ended the second part of his account with a quiet but firm statement. The mistake was not in underestimating their technology. The mistake was in underestimating their minds. Delegates across the chamber exchanged nervous glances. What they had assumed was a simple species, a group of loud, emotional creatures barely crawling into space, had shown they could outthink and outfight one of the most dangerous empires in the galaxy, and they had done it with half-broken ships, recycled scrap, and a message that still echoed across the stars. Finally, a challenge. As the stars shimmered silently above the Orion spur, the battlefield was far from quiet. Laser fire crisscrossed space like lightning in slow motion. Ships exploded in bursts of color and debris floated like broken dreams. But amidst all the chaos, there was something else. Something unsettling for those who had come expecting an easy victory. The humans were not just fighting back, they were enjoying the challenge. Captain Juno Marson stood at the command center of the Argus Dawn, one of the leading defense ships above Eden Cove. Her expression was calm, but her mind moved like wildfire. She wasn't trained by elite space academies or enhanced by nanotech. She was human, adaptable, imaginative, and raised on stories of impossible odds. And right now, she was writing one of her own. She watched as her fleet zigzagged through space, avoiding enemy fire with movements that made no logical sense to her enemies. That was the point. There were no patterns, no expected outcomes. The Torsen relied on calculations. Humans relied on instinct. In the control room next to hers, Renzo Thorne, a fighter pilot with a reputation for recklessness, grinned as he flipped his ship upside down and shot past two Torsen cruisers. He released a cluster of magnetic flares that clung to their hulls and exploded seconds later. "That's for underestimating Earth," he muttered to himself, pulling his ship into a spin that would have made most pilots pass out. But Renzo wasn't most pilots. He thrived in chaos. Below the orbital skirmish, on the surface of Novara Station, engineer Lena Vass worked with a group of technicians to transform a broken cargo hauler into a makeshift missile platform. She shouted directions while sparks flew around her, sweat dripping from her forehead. "Patch the fusion core to the guidance array. I don't care if it was meant for mining. Today it's a weapon." Her team scrambled to follow. The plan was risky, dangerous, but it was all they had. Lena didn't believe in perfection. She believed in action. Back in orbit, the Torsen fleets struggled to keep up. Their ships were built for controlled assaults and predictable movements. The humans gave them none of that. Every ship in the human fleet acted differently. Some seemed to charge without fear. Others moved in jagged, erratic paths, drawing fire away from more vital units. The Torsen analysts tried to make sense of it, but there was no pattern. And that was the awakening. This wasn't just a battle. It was a revelation. For the first time in galactic history, an underdeveloped species wasn't just surviving against superior forces. They were turning the tide. The Torsen flagship, Obsidian Crest, took a direct hit from an asteroid that had been pushed into its path by a tugboat. A tugboat. The crew didn't even believe it at first. "They're using rocks?" someone shouted. But it wasn't just rocks, it was everything. Space debris, disabled satellites, old cargo ships. They used it all. And then came the moment no one could forget. A human ship, the Harper's Reach, damaged beyond repair, lost its weapons in the first wave. Instead of retreating, the crew uploaded a signal to the enemy, blasting a musical piece humans called Ride of the Valkyries. Then, with no hesitation, they turned their ship into a weapon and rammed it into a Torsen destroyer. The impact destroyed both vessels. The transmission ended in static and silence. In the Interstellar Council chamber, Ambassador Nalix paused as he recalled that moment. "They sacrificed themselves," he said, his voice low. "Not out of fear, not out of desperation, but because they wanted to win." The delegates listened, in stunned silence. Species who had never known war, who couldn't imagine risking their own lives for others, couldn't understand. But they felt something stir in the room, a mix of awe and fear. Their ships were falling apart, Nalix continued. Their weapons were outdated. Their defenses were weak, but their minds were alive. Humans didn't follow strategy. They became strategy. At Delta Verge, the Torsen made one last attempt to regroup and strike with coordinated force. They sent their top officers into a triangle formation, a classic show of power. But before the formation could lock in, a group of human fighters dove directly through the center, scattering them like sparks in a windstorm. It was messy, wild, and completely effective. The humans didn't have the best ships, but they had something better: creativity, courage, and the willingness to take risks that no machine, no computer, no protocol could ever understand. Back on Eden Cove, Captain Juno received word that the Torsen were retreating. Her crew cheered, but she remained quiet. "They'll come back," she said, "but next time they'll think twice." In the council chamber, Nalix let the silence speak for a few seconds. Then he said, "That was the moment the galaxy woke up. Not because of power, but because of fear. Because we realized something we hadn't seen before." He raised his tendrils and pointed toward the holographic image of Earth. "They're not predictable. They're not perfect. But they are dangerous in ways we never imagined." The chamber remained silent, each delegate sitting still, minds racing. The awakening had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Interstellar Union's Grand Assembly Hall was no longer buzzing with noise. It was completely still. Delegates from across the galaxy sat in silence, each one processing the truth they had just heard. The walls, once lit with soft and pleasant, tones now pulsed with a dull, steady blue, the color of uncertainty. Ambassador Nalik stood alone at the center of the vast chamber, his tendrils resting lightly on the control pad. The last part of his report had shaken them all, but what he was about to say next would stay with them forever. Across from him, Envoy Kirill of the Credoni Alliance slowly stood. Her species had once believed in power through fear, but even she looked unsure now. "You're telling us that humans didn't just survive," she said slowly, her voice trembling. "They turned the battlefield into their own weapon?" Nalix nodded. "Yes, and not just once. In all 3 colonies, they didn't simply fight. They transformed everything around them into a tool for defense, for victory. Their broken ships became missiles. Their mining rigs became traps. Even their music became a message, one we couldn't ignore." Chancellor Drea, still at her elevated position, let her voice cut through the silence. But surely their main fleet was behind this. This level of response, this intensity, couldn't have come from outer colonies alone. Nalix's gaze turned heavier. "That's the part no one wants to hear. What you've seen, what caused the Torsen to retreat in disgrace, wasn't Earth's primary defense. It wasn't even their military. It was just settlers, engineers, retired officers, civilians. If Earth had sent its main fleet, this wouldn't be a report. It would be a warning." Whispers swept through the chamber. Delegates turned to each other, trying to understand what this meant. The Torsen Dominion, once believed to be untouchable, had suffered a defeat not from Earth's elite forces, but from its frontier population. The message was clear. If humans could do this with scraps and determination, what could they do when fully prepared? Ambassador Nalix tapped the control pad and a new image appeared above him. It was a message, transmitted to the Union shortly after the conflict. Just 2 lines. "We do not seek conquest, but we will not be conquered." He let those words hang in the air. "For the first time," Nalix said, "a species has told us something we haven't heard in thousands of cycles. They are not looking to rule. They're not expanding an empire. They simply want to live in peace. But they've made it clear, peace is not the same as weakness." The realization spread, slowly but firmly. Earth hadn't demanded tribute. They hadn't retaliated by attacking Torsen homeworlds. They hadn't sent a list of demands or seized territory. They had just stopped. As soon as the threat was removed, the humans went back to their colonies and began rebuilding. As if nothing had happened. That, Nalix explained, was what truly frightened the Torsen leadership. The silence. The restraint. It was the kind of quiet that came from confidence, not fear. The kind of quiet that said, "We're ready, but we don't have to prove it." As the council absorbed this, Scribe Tolan, who had been recording every word, leaned forward slightly. "So what happens now?" Nalix looked up toward Chancellor Drea. "We act wisely. We pass Protocol 88C. Effective immediately, no military action shall be taken near human territories. Earth is to be recognized as an independent protected zone, not to be challenged without unanimous council agreement." There were no objections. One by one, delegates from every species activated their confirmation signals. Even the Torsen representative, red-faced and silent, approved the motion. No one wanted to test Earth again. But before he left the center podium, Nalix added one final note. "There's one more thing. During the final moments of the battle at Delta Verge, a message was intercepted. It wasn't directed at us. It was a private recording from one human officer to another. But it tells us more than anything else we've heard." He activated the playback. A rough voice came through. It was Captain Juno Marson. "Glad that's over," she said. "Can't believe they sent a full fleet for this. Good thing we didn't need to call in the real ships. Those guys would have ended the war in an hour." The message ended. Silence returned once more, deeper than before. Earth hadn't even used its full power. What the galaxy had witnessed wasn't their best effort. It was just enough to win. Just enough to send a message. Ambassador Nalix deactivated the display and gave one final look around the chamber. "We often talk about what makes a civilization advanced," he said quietly. "We talk about power, knowledge, and control. But perhaps the real measure is knowing when not to use it," and with that, he turned and left the podium. As the chamber slowly emptied, there was no cheering, no celebration, no relief, only reflection. The galaxy had changed, and humanity had made sure they would never be overlooked again.